Hey guys, back with some more Bazaar. I've been playing a lot of Pig this season, and I've been a big Pig player. Apart from when I first started playing the game, and I was obsessed with Vanessa. Pig has been my most played character from when I really started, getting into the game fully. So I thought I'd make like a reasonably comprehensive guide, just kind of outlining how to play Pig through the early, mid, and late game, talking about the different stages, talking about what we want to do on Pig as well. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So, first things first, we want to talk about the early game. And the first thing we want to talk about is our opening choice. So what do we do here? So when we're talking about opening choice, obviously we have the three. We have gold, we have golden income, we have enchanted item, and then we have gold tier skill. So it's kind of, at least for me, it is a pretty clear ranking with Pig in terms of 1, 2, and 3. I think, personally, Pig, gold tier skill sucks. I don't think skills are super important until you get into the late game. There are some valuable skills. However, for the most part, I don't think they matter as much as what's on your board. And so in that case, when we think about what's on our board, what do we want to see? We want to be able to buy things, and then we also just want items. So then we're thinking about enchanted item, we're thinking about golden income. Now, enchanted item on Pig can be good. However, there are also a lot of misses. When you typically get things like obsidian, like heal on certain items, it tends to carry you through the early to mid game. But when I'm thinking about Pig, I think about Pig as an archetype in terms of his character. I don't care about going all the way to day 15, 16. We don't care about sacking a few, early games. What we're about is literally, we just want to flesh out our board fully and just continue that value scaling until we get all the pieces that we need. So that's why enchanted item is in second place, gold tier skills in third. But for me, golden income will always come out on top. I tend to pick this every time. And honestly, on every single character, I pick it as well. I just really appreciate the flexibility. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to get our hedge items. It allows us to get, our scalers for our board. We can buy some weapons. We can buy, a whole lot of different things. And it allows us to really get going early. Like if we wanted to get a silk going, we have to do a bit of buy sell. Having +2 income and 12 gold off the rip means that we can do a lot of buy sell early. We can be buying safes, buy some pinatas, even some gumballs if we want to. That's why I like to go with this one. We can buy our money tree, stick that in our stash. And then when it comes to day 3, day 2, we can buy our hedge properties as well. That's why I prefer this one over the others. It's not terrible taking enchanted item, but for me personally, in my experience with Pig, I found that 12 gold and 2 income typically is just better. It's just kind of a risk factor. You take enchanted item, of course, there's the fact that you can get a high roll, but in most cases it's, you just get something decent, or sometimes you just get something bad. And that's not really something that we want to see. I like to try and eliminate risk. So that's why for me, 12 golden income, our golden income start is the best. So now that we've talked about our opening choice and what we're going to be choosing, let's have a look at some great early monsters and encounters. With Pig, you do have to be a little bit selective in what you're choosing. Obviously, merchants are going to be really great. And then there are certain monsters that are also phenomenal, especially when you're playing certain board archetypes. And we'll just go through a couple of them now. All right, so let's start with merchants. What are some good merchants for day 1? I tend to like Ayla. I think Pig's early weapons is good. I like getting, maybe an early yo-yo, potentially the ores as well. I think there are a lot of good choices at Ayla. Small items I find are a little bit trickier. Like you get a real mix of weapon and non-weapon, and in the early game I find that you want to stick to an archetype, whether that's weapons or whether that's non-weapons or whether that's, your econ money tree. Typically you don't run that early, but or then we're talking, spiky shield and silk or something along those lines. So I find that Andy can be a little bit of a miss sometimes. JJ, I find is a really, really good shop. I like getting just, anything possible because, JJ sells items. He sells everything, all of Pig's items. So I think JJ is a really good shop. But I think coming to the last two here, who are probably my favorite, especially on day one, um, Mattel and Kina. I love non-weapon items on Pig. Things like Money Tree, Pig's Gym, Silk with Mattel. There are a lot, and I think the vast majority of Pig's core items, like the item on a build that really makes your build, are non-weapon items and tend to be that. So that's why I think Kina and Mattel, if we're talking day one, probably my favorite. I think survivability on Pig on day one is also really important. So we'd love to, maybe get a robe and a bushel on day one, stick that on the board, and that's already an amazing combo. Outlasts a lot of burst damage. And then, yeah, Mattel, we'd love to get a nice early silk. We'd love to get a spiky shield, and etc. etc. We'll talk about some of the other kind of early-ish encounters, like, day two, day three. Barkin is great. We get a lot of small items on Pig. We'd love to sell them for a higher price. Obviously, large and medium items are great as well because we'd love to get big properties. Curio is another, it's pretty good. If you have a lot of money, it's great for buy sell on something like Silk, something like Deed. And then, specifically when we're talking about Silk, Curio is a great shop for when we want to get a Crusher Claw. That's been a build I've been running a lot is, you get your Silk, you get your Spiky Shield, you get your Crusher Claw, and then you kind of just search for a fort. And that's your thing. Herma is, I think Heal Pig can be good. You need some pretty specific high rolls to make it great. I tend to go here if I'm searching for, a money tree to stick in my stash. I think Herma can be good, just not quite as good as the others. Kev's Armory, I think, is great. Shield items on Pig are amazing. We love to see Silk. We love, even Fixer Upper is still decent. Kev's Armory is fine, and we love to see Shield enchants as well, which Kev tends to give a lot. Midsworth does sell small and large items. It's okay. I like being able to sell mediums for a little bit more. It's not as good as the previous ones, and it's not amazing because you tend to just find small items sometimes. I think in the early game, there are a lot of large items that maybe start at gold, and you just can't find them. So he's not amazing, not as good as the previous ones. However, one great one is Pole. Like large items on Pig, typically on a lot of Pig boards, there's a large item. You'll find a large item on a lot of Pig boards, if not all of them. So I think Pole is an amazing vendor. I love Prospero, and I think that, once you get him, that's kind of when you start to go ballistic. I think that Prospero is brilliant. Yeah. Economic items obviously being super valuable. Money Tree, your Fixer Upper, tons of economic items that just are amazing on Pig. That's his whole, thing. Quicksoul is okay. Again, small items on Pig can be a little bit hit or miss. Obviously, there's some great econ items, some great options like, rewards card, like Piggy Bank. But typically, a lot of the small items aren't really what we want to see. Sylvia Valpak are decent. They're okay. They're not horrible. Those are kind of all of our early options. We'll get into some of the other merchants a little bit later, but these are pretty good. And we'll go through some of the encounters now as well. So we'll just do a quick run through of some monsters that we want to be fighting. Viper's amazing if we're running a weapons build. So is Fanged Inklet. Banana Ball is obviously an amazing one because we love Healthy Jolt. We do have a lot of heal items on Pig, so that initial haste can be really important. I tend to love going to Haunted Kimono. It feels like Silk Scarf never drops. However, when it does, it's a great reward. And that just kind of lets you run that for the rest of the game, Going to Haunted Kimono, getting the Silk Scarf sets you up for literally the rest of the run. And then for me, I think Kyber Drone and Pyro are probably the worst encounters. I think Burn Pig, like, Matchbox and other small burn items, I think isn't a very good archetype right now. It's not a very great build. Kyber Drone can be good, but I find that Langshon isn't very good on Pig. The crit chance, the cooldown does matter, and Trained can be good, but Pig just doesn't do a lot of slow. So I find that Kyber Drone isn't as valuable. Moving on to day 2, I think by far the best encounter here is Coconut Crab. I just love Crusher Claw, and whenever you have a Silk on board as Pig, this is the fight that I want to be going to, is Coconut Crab. I'll take it over every single other fight on the day if I have a Silk. I want the Crusher Claw no matter what. Um, then kind of going through some other good options. I like Giant Mosquito, like getting cooldown. Rush can be really good as well as the crit chance. I tend not to go for Rogue Strapper Boreal or Ventriloquist because I find that in the early game, as Pig, you can be a little bit weak. And we just like, you obviously have to win in the early game because if you, it's your game to lose. Like as long as you win your fights, you keep up with levels. However, if you take a risk and you lose, then it's bad. Now, another kind of decent option here, I think, is Covered as Thief. We love Pickpocket. Gold is obviously very important on Pig. So building up our income and just, getting some more gold for each fight we take is great. It's a great option for us. The other ones, take it or leave it. It's not the be all end all. And we'll just run through day 3 as well. Part of the early game, we'll just have a look at some good options. Good options, Street Gamer. Has a yo-yo. Obviously has a Temple Expedition ticket. That's kind of what we're looking for. Nothing else really matters. And then I think the next best option is also probably the best is Eccentric Aetherite. Obviously Rigged is still one of the best skills in the game, giving all of our items haste after an item usage. And then also Force Field can be really good on Pig if you get the right items. You can get a Silk, and if you get its cooldown low enough, you can get some really, really funky stuff going, especially with, things like Defense Grid and when you use a large item shield percentage-wise of your HP. So you can make some really interesting stuff with that. So those are the monsters and merchants. We'll just have a brief look through some of the other encounters in the, first 3 days or so. So we won't run through like the third option, your options like, gain some regen or, that sort of deal. But we will run through our like second options, like our chocolate bars, like our gumballs. So Strange Mushroom. I think this isn't bad on Pig. We have a couple of different options. We like a neutral item. We like buy sell on Pig. We like gold. Bushel isn't amazing and we don't care because we're not Mac and Dooley. Now, eating contest, if we have a Silk, it's great. We can get 5 free small non-weapon items to sell. And then obviously we do love health being a Pig as well. So if we have the money for it, especially on day 3, because this is when you get eating contest for the first time, on day 3, eating 5 gold chocolate bars and giving yourself 150 extra like health is one of the best events on day 3 possible. If you have the gold, I'd recommend spending it. 150 extra HP on day 3 is insane. It's absolutely amazing. I love Jungle Ruins on Pig. I typically go for tourist attraction. I don't really care about winning too much in the early game. I love getting income. So if we get 2 of these events in the first 2 days, plus 4 income, I don't really care too much about losing. We can waste an event. We can, live with it. I most of the time, if this is the best option, I'm just coming here and taking this. However, there are some better merchants that we can take. We can see some better stuff. Mandala as Pig can be interesting. You can get some really early diamond items in something like a Fixer-Upper, because obviously every 50 gold you upgrade it. This can be good, however, it's very niche. Gain regen, we don't really care. The docks is fine, like we can get some non-weapon items and sell them. Tiny Furry Monster, I think, isn't as good, because we don't really care too much about skills as Pig at a low level. There are some select few that are good, but majority of the time, we're not really too fussed about early skills. We prefer items. Economic Seminar is amazing. This is something that I always seriously consider going to when I see it. Gaining 2 economic items or skills for 4 gold is extremely valuable. You usually always make your money back off of it. Gumball Machine, if we have a Silk, it's probably the best encounter in the game. One of. Just getting 10 Gumballs, 10 free sell. If it's at silver, it's 120 shield. Because, you get 12 more shield a pop. It's amazing. Jules Cafe, we don't really care. This is obviously good if you have a wide weapons board, but it's not too crazy. And Lost Crate, I think, is actually a decent encounter if we're low on money. I like going for a medium item just to sell if we are low on money. Skill-wise on Pig, I'm not too concerned. It's not amazing. That's kind of it. For events, obviously there are some other select ones, but these are the real primary ones you're gonna see. I think they're mostly good. However, as Pig, if we have money, most of the time we want to be going to merchants. There are obviously some options like Gumball Machine, like Economic Seminar, like Eating Contest, where we're going to be taking it over a merchant. But with Pig, our priority is making our board as good as it can be. So we want to be going to merchants a lot. So, sometimes you won't just take these because you see a great merchant. So we've talked about some great early monsters and some of the great encounters. So now we're kind of going to talk about some early boards. So like, what are we looking for? And I'm just going to kind of, rip some things off the dome here. I think there are some examples that we can look at. First of all, what are our archetypes for early boards? We're going to be looking at weapons, then we look at survivability, and then we have a look at a blend of the two. So when I think weapons, I think, something like the ores, we're looking at a really wide weapons build. Sometimes we get an early showcase for scaling as well. And then when I think heal, I think maybe an early money tree, if we can get it at silver early enough and get the heal really high. And then I'm thinking something like a bushel, like a robe. We can go for a really survivable build early on, and we tend to just live. But I think a combination of the two usually I think is my favorite. I love putting, a money tree on the board, some quick heal items, and maybe some golf clubs. It's a pretty niche item that doesn't get used in the mid and late game. But I find in the early game it can work quite well when people don't always have enough damage to just burst you down through your money tree or through your heal items, and you can just slowly but surely get your damage all the way up to where you eventually kill them. I think that things like Silk, like Spiky Shield, are very easy to access in the early game, and they're still really good. I find that as a measure, you want your Silk to be around half your HP until you get into the late game. And I find that if you have a Silk with that amount of HP on your board, with a Spiky Shield, you're in a real good spot. You can beat a lot of poison boards because you are obviously just shielding over their poison and doing damage. Beat a lot of damage boards as well, just because the timing of Silk and Spiky Shield is so good in terms of its timing separation. Silk going off like 2 seconds beforehand. You're not going to take a whole lot of damage in between those two. We'll have a look at some example boards quickly of early Pig stuff and just go over it a little bit briefly. Alright, so here I have a very average example of one of the builds I was talking about, and that is weapons. So what are we focusing on here? We're just focusing on damage. We're obviously lucky enough to get a Toxic Fang. We have a Jabalian Longbow and a Slingshot that isn't really doing anything. But we are just focusing on the scaling of really the Fang. That's our main damage output here. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, we in the mid game as Pigs, what we're searching for is we just kind of sometimes get away with running a hybrid build on our board. So, maybe half of our board is damage and then the other half is survivability. And we haven't necessarily found all of our pieces yet. But this is a great example of something that we love to run. Is this, it's just some weapons with some damage scaling on Pig. Like, obviously a great replacement for the weights would be something like a showcase here. But it isn't always possible. We will go through another one real quick. So this is a slightly better example, in terms of, just having a better build. As you can see here, we've got a Silk going, and we have a Crusher Claw, so we've got some great early pieces, and from our inventory, we have a lot of buy-sell. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing half of our board that is really doing all of the heavy lifting. We have the Silk, and we have the Crusher Claw, and that's really what is carrying our board. The Boomerang and the Briefcase aren't doing too much. And it's exactly what I've been talking about. On Pig, we just want, even for half of our board to be doing something in the early game is okay. Because obviously we like to win, and we should win wherever possible. But on Pig, we obviously live for the late game. So it's not necessarily all about that. So we can afford to invest in the items that are on our board currently, like silk, and then, just not necessarily need to fill out the rest because it isn't necessarily got to synergize, and we can just focus on scaling that one item. Because, we don't want to be putting something like weapons on the board or, some really quick stuff like a yo-yo, because in the future that isn't going to matter too much. And we want to focus on what's on our board and what's in our inventory. Obviously, if we have something like a money tree in our inventory, that would be really great right now because we'd have, that hedge. But this is just an example of an early game sort of board. So, what are some good bronze skills? We'll just have a look through some on Pig quickly. I don't think there are a lot of good bronze skills on Pig. I think that you can do okay. There are some decent ones. But most of the time, if we can take a different option to a skill, usually it'll be better for us. But we'll go through and we'll do our due diligence and we'll just outline some decent stuff. Artillery spotter. A lot of the time we are going to be running less than 5 items on Pig, so having more crit chance is great, and it's similar with critical protector. Even having that plus 5% is okay. I think defense grid of bronze is bait. I don't think it's amazing. Obviously Pig, you do get high HP, but I don't think it's that great. Healthy Hoarder, I think, is actually a really good skill. Having a lot of extra HP in the early game, if we're maybe running an item heavy board, with our matchboxes, with things like that, it can be really good. All of these I don't think really matter too much. Brawler is a really good one, actually. If we are looking at some silver stuff, we are trying to pivot into Pygmalien drum, into a gym, and we have some wide weapon stuff. Brawler is great to give us some extra HP. And what else are we looking at? Honed Arsenal, again, for the wide weapon boards is okay. Large Appetites is good as well. Initial Chill. Open for Business is great for income. Lethargy is a funky one. It's decent in some very specific circumstances. Prime Real Estate is okay. Property Mogul is okay. Reinforced Steel is pretty great with, some of the Pig freeze builds like Igloo. We have a lot of properties with some shield. Reserve Shield is okay. Second Wind is okay. And then we start getting into, your gold tier stuff. So, skills on Pig, not super important. I just wanted this to be super brief. It isn't our priority. What we want to focus on is items above all. There are some good bronze skills, but none that you necessarily want to go out of your way for. Okay, so quickly talking about the early game, the first 3 days, we're going to have a look at some hedge items for future boards. Off the top of the dome, we're looking at things like money tree. We're looking at a lot of items that you can just stick in our stash and really give us a benefit while in there. If we need to sell it, we can. But at the same time, if we hold on to it and we get the pieces for it, it can be extremely valuable in the mid to late game. So we'll just have a look at some quickly. So first of all, and probably the only medium item that we want to be keeping in our stash and maybe hedging, Luxury Kiosk. Now, I don't think this is an amazing option when we compare it to the other ones. I think its value scaling is hard to accomplish when we look at the other ones. They're slightly easier. It is okay in the current meta. I don't think it's phenomenal. I think it's too slow, and there are better options when we're running, slow medium items like Silk, like Spiky Shield, like Crusher Claw. They're all things that we'd want to be running over something like this. Luxury QS is okay. So, things that we really want to be focusing on. Money Tree, an amazing one. Obviously, it starts at bronze, so that is phenomenal. We can get this on day 1 and start scaling it from the get-go. It gives us a ton of econ. We get so much spare change. It scales its value. If we need to sell it, we can. An amazing option. This is in a lot of late game builds now, Money Tree. It's just kind of at the minute the better fixer-upper. It is amazing. Pawn Shop is another decent option. I think Health Pig is a little bit harder to pull off. But if you can get Pawn Shop, then it's a great pivot. You keep this in your inventory. No matter what item you sell, it gains value. Again, it's just great for your economy. If you don't want to use it eventually, you just sell it and you get a shit ton of money. So that's okay. And that's okay with us. Yeah, so Pawn shop is okay. Probably not the best option. Um, you know, if we're not necessarily going for a health build, we'd prefer to run something like belt on the board. Typically, you're going to get more HP with something like that. Um, but you know, it's okay. So some slightly more, you know, not this one isn't niche, but the last one is. So Pig's Gym, I think, is maybe my personal favorite in terms of hedge items. It is kind of the antithesis for certain builds. If we're running something like a showcase with wide weapons on board, getting a Pig's Gym is like the dream. Because we want to be buying a lot of weapons anyway, because, you know, we want to run them on the board. So having a Pig's Gym and just getting some free HP, getting some free value on some buy-sell for weapons is amazing. It's the perfect hedge item for something like that. However, if we are running something like Silk, you know, maybe something like Money Tree, or, you know, something that doesn't necessarily require weapons on Pig, this can be a slightly restricted option. Like, you're not going to be buying a lot of weapons. You don't really want to force that. You can, in theory, just get value from it. Because, you know, obviously when we're gaining value on the item 357, selling certain items like, you know, bronze small weapons, it'll give us value every time. But you are also using that money in that moment, and in order to get that back, you have to sell it. So if we want to expand our options in terms of purchasing, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. But I think if we're running a weapons board already, getting a Pig's Gym is the dream. And last one, which isn't necessarily a hedge item in the case that we are going to be running it on the board necessarily, unless we are running something like a HP build, but I think Lemonade Stand is a great option just for, you know, the buy sell. If we are buying and selling a lot of small items, then why not get a little bit of extra HP? Um, and that's all there really is to it, in all honesty, is you just smell small items and you just get some more HP from it. So those are kind of our hedge items for the early game. Now we'll start looking at the mid game. So, mid game, what are we focusing on? There's kind of two different options for the mid game. So we either want to be transitioning into our hedge or maximizing our current board. So what I mean by that is transitioning into our hedge, what does that look like? We have a weapons board, we have a showcase, we have a Pig's Gym. And what do we want to be doing? We just want to be buying weapons in order to eventually transition into the gym. And we want to be, you know, buying a balcony. And, you know, we want to be buying an atlatl or other certain weapons that synergize especially well with the gym. And when I talk about, you know, money tree, what does that look like? We want to be, you know, finding a great enchant. So if money tree's been in our stash and, you know, we're talking about mid game, so we can just lose and we can get our enchant on sudden death. So if we get our enchant, that's when we, you know, enable that. And that's when we pivot. But that's, you know, rare case in that sense because, you know, you should still win some in the early game. But when we talk about maximizing our current board, what I mean is, let's think about some classic things. So let's think we have a Jabalian drum or we have a showcase and we have wide weapons. I tend to use this example a lot in, like, you know, wide weapon pig, but we just want to be upgrading our weapons and we want to be finding better weapons than the ones that we've got on board. And let's say we've got a silk and a spiky shield. We want to be trying to find curio and we want to try and find large items and properties because we want to get a fort and we want to get a crusher claw. So that's kind of the two different ways, and they're not necessarily the antithesis of each other. Like we don't have to do one without doing the other. It's quite easy to do both at the same time, especially if you are, you know, running silk or you're running weapons board and you have a synergistic item in your like stash. So let's say we have a silk on board and then we have a money tree. Obviously for silk, we want to be buying and selling some non-weapon items, but money tree enables that. And, you know, getting things like a piggy bank, it enables the money tree, but at the same time, it's also enabling the silk. And then, you know, when we have that weapons board, upgrading weapons is great. And then it also enables the gym that's in our stash. So they're not, you know, you don't have to do one without the other. You can do both. And what I want to emphasize is don't commit too early to things, and don't just sell things and get rid of them because you don't have a use for them, because they could have a use later. I think that that's a habit that I'm trying to break out of is, I get a monster reward and it's a medium item, and I just immediately think, "Oh, I don't need that." And then I just sell it. There was no point in me selling that item until I needed to. So I may as well have sold it maybe when we get to a shop that buys medium items, like Midsworth, who buys medium items at a higher price. But it isn't, we can do both. And it kind of also goes into getting the economy flowing. Now with Pig, there are economic items. So we're thinking about things like our money tree, like our pawn shop, like our gym as well. But what truly gets our economy flowing? So a great way of thinking about this is looking at the merchant Prospero. He sells all of the economy items to the game, basically. So we think about something like ADM. We want to be buying and selling those when we have the money and just get our income up. Especially as a pig, if we've lost early, we still have a lot of days left. We get a ton of value out of that. Boomerang is another great case. Loot items sell for money. Buying and selling briefcases when we have something like a money tree in our stash is a great option. Cash register is also a decent option to just get, a little bit more income per day. Obviously, money tree piggy bank is a great combo. Rewards card, safe, business card. Like, there are so many different ways to get our economy truly flowing. And it's not, it always tends to be a combination of things. Like, you're never going to just get your economy flowing just by having a money tree, or just by having, buying ATMs. It's going to be a combination. That's how you're truly going to start earning a ton of money as Pig, is by buying economy items. And it's investing. It's literally what it is. It's investing in your economy. Yeah, I think it does have some nuance to it. You can't just buy everything in hopes that it'll give you some kind of value in the future. There has to be some kind of calculation to it, but it isn't. It's important to consider what you have, the money that you already have, and how long you have left. The earlier in the game that you get income, the better. So we get ATM, it's great, but late in the game we want immediate value, so income doesn't matter as much. So you just have to take these considerations into your mind when thinking about your economy, and don't spend all your money at once. You always want to have money available on Pig, because it's all about hedging items and pivoting. And you might find the perfect item to pivot, and you always want to have enough money for that item, because it really sucks when you don't get it. So now we've talked about economy. I've talked about it a lot in the video so far, and it's just not to worry too much about losses. We can afford to lose as Pig. It's not the be all end all, like, Dooley and Vanessa, especially at the minute, is getting wins in the early game and the mid game super important, because we love going to the late game as Pig. And that's when we truly start to see the full value of our items. Now, it gets to a point. We would love to win a couple of times just to gain a little bit of a buffer, to get our board together, but it's not necessarily needed. You can lose the first 6 days and still come out with a 10 win on Pig. You get a great enchant on your items and then you're good to go. But do we throw? And this is coming to the next point. When can we throw? So, like, what does that look like? We have a money tree on board. We have some value scaling items. We have a billboard, or maybe we even have a subscriber or something like that, and we have a VIP pass. Do we put the VIP pass on the board in a PvP fight in order to get some value? If we think we can risk it and maybe win, yes. And we're not too worried about losing. So I like to do that. I find that honestly, VIP pass, when we have some slower properties adjacent to it that need that value, it's decent. It's not a bad item. But yeah, I think that you shouldn't be too worried about losing. I think winning is great, but on Pig, we love the late game. So it's not necessarily the be all end all. Yeah, and we'll have a look at some quick build archetypes in the mid game. It is a little bit similar to what we were looking at earlier, but we'll just have a look at a couple of different ones. So this is coming off of the other one. This is a pretty decent example of a mid game like build. It's still kind of a hybrid. We have a money tree on board with a VIP pass, and then we have a silk, we have a crusher claw, we even have a boomerang. I don't remember whether in our stash whether we have a spiky shield or not, but that's not really the point. The point is we can still afford to lose. And so what we're doing here is we're hedging our bets. If we see a great enchant for something like the scarf or the claw, that's when we take that. But if we start seeing items for the money tree, then maybe we start to lean in that direction. It's all about hedging your bets as Pig and kind of having two different avenues. We'll have a look at one other option quickly as a different sort of comparison. So obviously this is a little bit of a crazy day 6 build because, you know, we have a diamond skyscraper, but this is it's an example of an economy build in the mid game. We have the VIP pass on board. We're not afraid to try and get that value scaling. And then we have a fixer-upper, we have that money tree, and that's what we are focusing on. And it's the mid game, it's all about just trying to work towards the late game. So with this, we see that value scaling on money tree and a skyscraper, and that's our end game. So if I skip all the way to the end here and we look at what our board is, it's very, very similar. You know, it's literally just those two items, and that's where we're going in the mid game. Is we found our board and we're maximizing it. We've pivoted to the skyscraper, to the money tree, and now we're just maximizing our board. So now that we've talked about the mid game, we're now going to go into the late game. So mega build archetypes. So we just had a look at a really great example, and I'll just switch back to that quickly, is literally just this. It's literally, this is a mega late game archetype. You can see it's day 15, and we've just won. So this is, you know, the value archetype. This is the, you know, we have just scaled our value the whole time. We have a balcony, we have a money tree, we have a ton of value on board. And this build here, it doesn't necessarily need the skyscraper. It is kind of just a nice bonus. The money tree typically, you know, looking at what we're up against, it might be a bit difficult, but this is enough. We obviously have some really great skills as well, but that's not really the focus of this segment. This is our late game. We've stuck with our items, we've gone all the way, and this is what we're looking for. So moving on to our second example, we're still going off of the same two runs. This is another archetype. This is the silk, you know, silk fort, crusher claw sort of build. And again, this is another case of maximizing our board. We have truly just stuck with the silk buy sell. You can see how much money we had after selling that money tree that we had earlier in this run. You know, we had this money tree all the way back here and we've sold it. We have a ton of money now. So, you know, this is our board. It's truly just maximizing, and that's really it, is that maximization. We want to, like, you know, just consider both of those avenues. And in this case, we got some really great enchants. We got obsidian, and then we got obsidian again. So we decided, yeah, I'm just gonna go for this, because, you know, if we start seeing burn poison, we saw this fort pretty early, so we just decided to stick with this, and it's an archetype that's typically good enough to beat the game. And we just decided to have a lot of money for the buy sell as well. So having the two different options, and especially pivoting into something that doesn't require a lot of economics, is good. Because when we have a money tree and we decide to pivot into something else, it's just a huge bonus to be able to get, like, 100, 200 gold and be able to spend money on whatever you want. Those are our two example builds, so we'll move on to the next segment. Pivots versus non-pivots, we have kind of talked about that with the two archetypes, but I'll expand on it a little bit more. Late game, pivots versus non-pivots, we're not pivoting in the late game. That's not what we're doing. We have pivoted, and the way that the late game runs is obviously a little bit different. Typically with something like a value scaling build, you need to start it early. You need to, get it a money tree nice and early, get a fixer upper, get whatever you want, and start scaling that with something like a rewards card, with a VIP pass. And then we have non-pivots where, we have a silk and we stick with it the whole time. And that's kind of what the late game is about. Well, before you get there, the late game, you're locked in, you're done. You have to stick with what you've got, or else you lose, typically. But it is not always the case. There are specific examples, but yeah, we want to think about how we have pivoted and how that has affected our board, and what decisions we can make to just elevate our board further. And that's what we're going to look at now, is some skills. Diamond, gold skills on Pig in the late game can be game changing. Early on the skills aren't all that, but when we get into the late game, that's when they start getting a little bit crazy. So we'll have a look at some of the really high tier skills now. Okay, so you can see I've got a lot of skills here, so I'll go through them very briefly. These are just things to elevate you. Obviously, diamond, gold, defense, grid with something like a silk and a spiky shield is amazing. Artillery spotter, if we get a diamond or gold, it's just a ton of crit chance for when we have a low amount of items, so that's amazing as well. Lethargy, very specific cases where it's good. Something like a fort build can be game changing. Reserve shields, similar to defense grid, we're just getting a percentage of our max HP, and as Pig we have a lot of that, so with something like a spiky shield can be really valuable. Big numbers, we have a lot of big items on Pig, so just having more crit chance on something like a money tree, with an enchant on it, can be really valuable as well. Ball market, again, when we're doing value scaling and we have a weapon like we have a skyscraper or we have an obsidian money tree, just giving things more damage equal to their value makes a lot of sense. It can give us a lot more damage. Chocoholic, when we're doing buy sell on something like a silk, this can be really good. And then obviously when we have something like a deed and we're really focusing on that as well with our value scaling, can be really valuable as well. Commercial zoning, this is a very specific skill. We have a property and we have a lot of gold, can be good. Rare cases, but can be game changing. Diamond Heart, if we're running quite a busy board, then we do tend to have really big items at the end of the game, but we get a lot of upgrades as Pig, so having a lot of diamond items typically isn't that much of an issue, so Diamond Heart can be really good. Electrified Hole, we do a lot of shielding as Pig, so getting some charge is good, especially when we have slow items. Industrialist, we run a lot of properties, so flat cooldown is always amazing. Housewarming Gifts, it's literally just like the better version of Chocoholic. When we buy a property, we get a ton of buy-sell. Long Strides, again, 5 or fewer items, we just get cooldown reduction, which is great on Pig. Charge on Pig, again, is phenomenal, especially when we have slower items. We get to charge a really slow weapon. Pacifist, when we're running, Toxic or Fiery on a money tree or something along those lines, this is really good just to give us some more cooldown. Quality over quantity, we're running Freeze, we've got an Ice Club, Giant Ice Club, or whatever its new name is now on the board. This can be really good as well. You don't find a lot of single weapon builds on Pig, but it can be good in specific cases. When you get an Obsidian enchant, that's another great example. Quick defense, we do a lot of shielding on Pig, so just having flat cooldown on our shield items is great. Shield bash, again, charging our weapons is amazing. We want to be using them quickly. We have a lot of large obsidian items sometimes, so, big guns is a big high roll, but can be game changing. Cash deposits, again, we've got a weapons build, we've had a hedge item for a long time, and we sell it, and all of a sudden we get a ton of gold, then cash deposits can be really great. Double down, just doubling the damage, especially when we have a lot of half HP. So reaching half doesn't necessarily matter a lot, but doubling damage is always a good thing. We could have a really big fixer-upper with a lot of damage, or we could have an obsidian, silk or something along those lines. So emergency shield is a great option. Healthy heart, just getting a lot of cleanse on pig, because you do have a lot of heal, but healthy heart just takes it a little bit further, gives you some more survivability. Retooled is a little bit more niche on pig. Typically you want to be running it with something like a Kias or something along those lines. It really does enable that sort of item. Knife tricks, when we're running a really quick weapons build, it's phenomenal. Something like a gym with some quick weapons, or obviously a Pygmalien drum or something along those lines in the late game. And then Desperate Cleanse, similar to Healthy Heart, we just get a ton of cleanse. And those are all of the skills that I think can be really game changing as pig, or just really, really great additions in the late game. Typically, as pig in the late game, you have all the money in the world, so you can find these relatively easily and just buy them in skill vendors. And yeah, that's all the skills. And that's kind of it for the late game. I think with the late game on pig, it's really, it's really about sticking to your guns. And our guns on pig are our early game, building our initial board, finding our hedge items, maybe finding our board. And then mid game is deciding whether we want to pivot or stick with our board that we have and maybe do two at the same time. And then in the late game, it's just we found what we want, we're sticking with it all the way until the end. Maybe we find an item that fits, but really what we're trying to do is just enable our current board as much as possible, find some skills to elevate our current board, and that's it. That's all we're really doing in the late game, and just having some decent decision making. So that's kind of it for the guide. We kind of covered it in a slightly different direction. It's more of an overall guide on how to play the character rather than looking at specific builds and how to play those. It's kind of trying to inform you more about, some decision making and how to pivot and things like that, and hedging and, specific things in the game where, well, I'm not telling you to go and play a specific build necessarily, but I'm, more so trying to tell you how to play a character and maximize your potential. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, that was my guide. Please let me know down below if you have any tips or anything you would like me to add. I would love to make an updated version of this in the future. I will probably do some build guides for pig as well. But hey, if you enjoyed, please subscribe, like, drop a comment down below as well, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.